Joining me now is the Herald Sun senior writer, Patrick Carlile. And Patrick, thanks for joining us. Young Labor branches are revolting against the treatment of rogue Senator Fatima Payman by the Albanese government. Now, The Australian is reporting that the Prime Minister's foundational faction, the New South Wales Young Labor Left, will actually host Senator Payman as a special guest in a forum next week to promote the cause of Palestine, despite, of course, her resignation from the party. Now, I am definitely not a supporter of Senator Payman, but gee, Labor are in a world of pain over this.
Well, I think that's the right way of putting it. It is a world of pain, and I think this is just the start. I mean, you've seen all these pro-Palestine sort of forces coalescing, and it sounds like it was quite planned in the last few weeks, and it's all sort of coming to a head now. You have the young ALP activists who are pushing Payman and pushing what she's saying. And the problem for a government is that you cannot. They've got conflicting priorities here. They've got to govern for the national interest, and at the same time, they're trying to pander to those pro-Palestine elements in those seats in Sydney and Melbourne and elsewhere that really could swing dramatically. And this is fascinating. This is a real moment in Australian politics and the next election as to seeing how far and how significant this will be in determining results.
Well, absolutely, particularly in the event of a minority government, what does that mean? And I really believe that Fatima Payman is going to have a lot of influence in the policies that we're going to see coming up. Now, Anthony Albanese has appointed lawyer and business executive Gillian Segal as Australia's inaugural anti-Semitism special envoy. Here is what the Prime Minister had to say earlier.
I have spoken with members of the Jewish community who have not felt safe. Members of the Jewish community whose children are worried about wearing their school uniform in our capital cities. That's not acceptable.
Patrick, since October 7, Australia's social cohesion really has descended into chaos. We know anti-Semitism is rife. The Prime Minister and his ministers have been largely silent as to not upset voters in key seats with high Muslim populations. Now, I'm hopeful that this envoy will change that, but why now? It's just a little too late.
Well, look, it's certainly too late, and hopefully it's not too little. I mean, what we saw Elbow saying there, he should have been saying that on October 15 last year, 8 months ago. The anti-Semitism has been unchecked in pockets of Australia since that time, and he hasn't come down hard in sort of saying, well, hang on, this is not who we are, this is not what we're about. I think this is a welcome development with the special envoy. I liked what she had to say earlier today. She talked about anti-Semitism being an age-old hatred. She talked about it having no place in a free society. And she talked about the need to be vigilant. And we have not been vigilant in stemming this since October last year. And look, it is too late, but hopefully it makes a difference.
Look, fingers crossed it does. Now, how is this for a cash grab? Woolworths has announced it will restock Australian flags in its stores ahead of the Paris Olympic Games because, quote, the Australian flag is the official flag of the Australian Olympic Committee and of our team competing in Paris. So, Patrick, the Australian flag is an Australian flag when it's not Australia Day.
Well, when there's a buck in it, I think, really. They're sponsoring the Olympics, as you said. They want people to go to Woolies. And look, I think most people will be very cynical about this. This is a cash grab, as some of the Conservative politicians have been saying. You can't have it both ways. You can't virtue signal and say that the Australia Day is divisive, and by inference, as is the Australian flag, and then sort of proudly, call yourselves proudly Australian retailer and suddenly say, oh, we've got these flags and we want you to be patriotic because you might buy our flags. I mean, I think most Australians see through this for what it is. And the big error lay back on Australia Day by basically saying Australia Day is divisive.
Yeah, they only want the Australian flags when they know they can make a bit of money out of it. They're an absolute disgrace, Woolworths, that always have been. Now, Greens Senator Mehreen Faruqi, the one who couldn't quite bring herself to say whether Hamas should be disbanded, remember?
Does Hamas need to be dismantled?
It has nothing to do with Palestinian statehood and Palestinian self-determination.
No, the question was, does Hamas need to be dismantled?
The Palestinians need to decide.
If they choose Hamas, that's okay?
David, that is such, what can I say? Like,
Should it be dismantled?
Hamas is an organization that exists in the region that we are talking about.
Surely you're able to say whether you'd like to see them gone.
I mean, it's not up to me.
Yeah, it's an absolute disgrace. Well, Mehreen Faruqi is set to reap an $850,000 windfall from an upcoming property sale from her multi-million-dollar housing portfolio. Now, Patrick, the irony in all of this is that she recently described the housing system in Australia as one that sees millions screwed over while banks and property developers make an absolute killing off the misery of others, but clearly not for her.
Well, basically, I think she has 3 or 4 investment properties in Australia, and she's been very strong in saying, these people are making money off the misery of others. She's one of them. And she's been, sort of waving about this very high-minded sort of rhetoric about how we must do more. Well, she's been profiting. And look, this is a fascinating story. It comes off the back of the Hamas, her inability to condemn Hamas the other day. She's not having a good week, is she?
No, I don't think she's been having a good week for a long time. In fact, I think the Greens have had a shocker of a year, or at least since October 7. Yes. Now, France's far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, has joined forces with the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in a new far-right alliance in the European Parliament. The Patriots for Europe has become the 3rd largest force in the European Parliament. Patrick, of course, this comes after Le Pen's party came 3rd in the France election. And now we're seeing these chaotic images coming out of France where the far left have really plunged it into absolute chaos. But what do you think this new alliance means? Well,
look, I think perhaps it's an early chapter in the change that Europe's sort of been waiting for a long time. It's been run by very left of centre policies for a long time. That has upset a lot of ordinary Europeans across many countries, not just France and Hungary. I think there's 12 countries represented in this bloc. Basically, and they talk about retaking institutions, they talk about retaking the borders. I mean, a lot of Europeans have been very upset about immigration rates, about cost of living, about energy policy and so on. And this is the pendulum swinging back, if you like. And we have to wait to see whether it swings back too far. But it's certainly, it's overdue, isn't it?
Oh, it's definitely overdue. But, the scenes we're seeing right now across France are just frightening, yes. Really. And it's, it could it be happening here next? We just simply don't know. Now, to the US, where Donald Trump is distancing himself from the so-called Project 2025, aimed at overhauling the federal government. Now, it's been authored by some of his former staffers and members of the Heritage Foundation. But Patrick, why do you think that Trump is trying really hard to distance himself from this?
Well, you look at Trump at the moment, and he's been quieter in the last, for the last week and a half than he has been for years. And there's a good reason for that. He doesn't want to take the attention away from Joe Biden and the Democrats eating themselves up by trying, whether the conundrum of whether they keep an unelectable candidate as their candidate. Look, I think he's being very dishonest in distancing himself from this. Some of his closest colleagues were heavily involved in it. And I think it stands to alienate potentially some of those right-wing sort of voters who are more moderate. It talks about banning the abortion pill. It talks about dismantling the education system. It would scare some of the right of centre voters. And he doesn't need to do that at the moment. He doesn't need to do anything at all. He'd rather just have all the attention on Joe Biden and whether he can finish a sentence or not.
Well, that's it. I mean, Joe Biden's doing all the media for himself at the moment. All Donald Trump has to do is sit back and watch the circus unfold right in front of his eyes. He doesn't even have to try. So you raise a good point. Now, we saw overnight that Russia launched its largest missile attack on Ukraine in months, striking a children's hospital in Kiev, as well as other sites across the country. Patrick, we know dozens have been killed and injured in this. Is it now time to step up more support for Ukraine among Western nations?
Absolutely. Look, I think poor Ukraine has sort of got lost a bit in the whole Gaza story, hasn't it? Certainly for since October. It's a democracy. It was fighting the Nazis in World War II and then the Russians ever since, on and off. It is a democratic country that believes in freedoms. Vladimir Putin is not going to stop. He's an imperialist. He's not going to stop until he has Ukraine. There's going to be a winner and there's going to be a loser. And this is the biggest battle that Ukraine has ever faced. It needs all the Western support that it can get to fight the good fight.
It certainly does, and you're right, it's almost been forgotten, which is sad amongst the Middle East conflict, but it's clear Putin will stop at nothing, and that is the frightening part. Patrick Carlyon, good to speak with you. Thanks for joining us.